Hi, I'm Nikki Jovicic from LookUpStrata, and for today's webinar session, I'm joined by Ryan Richards and Paul Anderson from Sedgwick. Today, we're talking about dealing with contaminants in strata. We'll be discussing things like asbestos, illegal drugs, and very topically, mould. Ryan and Paul have a presentation on this topic, and then we'll move into Q&As. As this is a national webinar, if we refer specifically to state legislation, we'll mention which state we're referring to, and during the Q&As, we'll mention the state at the beginning of each question. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that the information contained in this session, including the discussions that arise from submitted questions, is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as legal advice. You should seek independent advice before acting on the information contained in this session. Thanks to Ryan Richards and Paul Anderson for joining us today. Ryan is Technical Manager, Senior Restoration Consultant at Sedgwick. Ryan specialises in water, mould and fire damage. He has over 21 years experience in the industry. During his time at Sedgwick, Ryan has specialised in working on large and complex domestic, industrial, commercial and strata claims around Australia. He holds IICRC certification and has had extensive training and experience in mould remediation, water damage restoration, fire and smoke restoration, crime and trauma decontamination, along with clandestine grow house decontamination. Paul is Restoration Consultant at Sedgwick. His specialists include illicit drug investigation and remediation. Paul has 11 years restoration industry experience. During his time at Sedgwick, Paul has specialised in large and commercial water losses, industrial, commercial and strata fire losses, and clandestine remediation around Australia. Sedgwick frequently appear in our monthly newsletters and magazines and regularly contribute to questions about building defects, scope of works, mould and water damage received from the LookUpStrata audience. I'd like to welcome Ryan and Paul, and thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki.
Okay, I'll leave you to share your screen and do your presentation now. Thanks everyone for jumping in and saying hi. Welcome to everybody.
All right, yeah, thanks, Nikki. Hi everybody, and thanks for joining us. Some people earlier than others. This slideshow we're going to go through, obviously, with the asbestos, mould and illicit drugs. We'll just touch on some basic topics. The main goal of this is to just go through a bit of an overview and open it up to the room, as like Nikki said, and get the questions, because I'm sure that a lot of people have burning questions that they'd like answering, and we're here to help as best we can. If there's anything during the actual presentation that you need clarification on, just reach out to Nikki, as said, and she'll help out, and we'll get to those questions at the end. I'll probably go through fairly quick in regards to the asbestos and the mould side, just so we can emphasise more points on the Q&A towards the end. With me? Okay, asbestos, the overview. What is ACM? It's obviously, as a lot of us all know and we're all familiar with, asbestos has been around for a while. ACM stands for asbestos containing material. Generally comes in classed as friable or non-friable. Some of the non-friable or bonded sections do become friable when they're burnt under a fire. Where do we find ACM? Generally in strata buildings, unless they're the older type, you'll probably find them under the eave linings, some of the electrical meter boards, the imitation brick or weatherboard cladding, instant products. It is starting to get phased out, as we all know, so we're less likely to see it. There's obviously was the situation down in Canberra years ago with Mr. Fluffy with the insulation, which was a big thing, but the majority of those have all been cleaned up. What are the risks of asbestos? Obviously, we're all familiar with health risks. It's not a secret. It's out there. Everybody knows what can cause, what damages and that cause from it. With respect to the damage in the buildings, obviously, when asbestos is in a building through a fire or flood damage, it can increase the repairs and the cost of repairs in the building, depending on whether or not it actually has stayed bonded or it's classed as friable. The management of the asbestos, normally a lot of our panel partners, restorers and builders do a minimum of asbestos awareness course, so they can identify or have a rough idea of identifying what may be asbestos on a job site. Obviously between asbestos, villa board, it is difficult to completely guaranteed just by a visual. We are on the side of, if we're unsure and the age of the building does put it into the asbestos risk category, we tend to engage a hygienist virtually immediately to test and confirm with lab results that it is or isn't asbestos prior to any remediation or invasive works. If it is a fire and asbestos has been compromised, we generally get the encapsulation done by asbestos remediators, spraying of PVA to contain it to limit the airborne asbestos, and or the removal. If it's a small piece of a tree's landed on the side of the roof and it's broken through the eave lining, then we can get up there and actually remove the sheets back to the full sheets. So then that way there it limits any further risk to the public. And then there's either the replacement or the repair option of the asbestos. Generally, the rule of thumb is where there is asbestos, if it has been compromised and it is damaged, then we look at replacing all of it, because obviously the asbestos needs to be removed. We then move on to mould. What is mould? Everybody knows what mould is. Mould can be found on cheese. Mould can be found in the garden outside. Mould's everywhere. It can grow virtually on any organic substance as long as there's moisture and oxygen. There's three things that will assist in mould growth. It obviously needs oxygen, moisture, and a food source. If you remove one of the three or all of them, then the mould will eventually die and not grow any further. When will mould occur? Generally after water ingress. Now, if you get water ingress in a property, mould generally, unless it's in the perfect environment, generally won't occur within the first probably 3 to 4 days. So if someone has lodged a claim where the mould is obviously, and they said that it happened yesterday, the likelihood of that happening is probably incorrect. It's probably been there for a lot longer. The other option is that the mould normally with environmental conditions, lack of ventilation. I actually get mould in my house during the winter periods when the sun moves to the back of the home. It all comes down to ventilation. If you can open up the windows and get flush some of the dry air through, it can help with minimising the mould. Health risks associated with mould. It's mainly, mould, so in some cases people have put the fear factor in it and referred it to like the next asbestos. Look, mould affects everybody differently, depending on whether you're immunocompromised, young, elderly, and the building damage. It varies. Mould in a building can vary with the extent from mould on a glass, which mould on curtains, wherever it may be. It all depends, and it also depends on the conditions. If it's in the perfect conditions, mould will tend to grow a lot quicker and spread a lot quicker. And then as the mould and the water remains in the property, different stages of mould where you'll find aspergillus, penicillium, and then you move on to the stachybotrys at a later stage, which is a water-loving one. So the idea is to minimise as much mould is to obviously remove the moisture as soon as possible. Mitigation process, obviously the prevention is number one. Fix any leak in plumbing and leaks in the building envelope ASAP. Watch for any condensation or wet spots. Keep humidity to a minimum. Like I said, open up the windows. Keep ventilation systems cleaned and maintained. Filters, a lot of the air conditioners, there was stuff on the news not long ago where they showed that a lot of the split system air conditioners were harbouring mould. Look, it is going to be in there, same as in the car AC. It's just whenever there's an environment with high moisture, unless you keep it maintained and cleaned, you'll always have a situation where mould can appear. And don't let foundations stay wet for extended periods. Remediation, obviously you need to fix the water. Before we do any remediation when it comes to mould, the main goal is to stop or remove the actual source of the water ingress. Like I said before, if we take out one of the three or all of them, then the mould will stop growing. If the water is still coming or they haven't located the leak, remediation can commence. However, to have a successful remediation and clear the property, we need to get the source fixed first. It's the best form of action. Engage experts to assist in identification. Not every job requires a hygienist when it comes to mould. I know a lot of people out there will say that yes, that is the case. It's all on a need by case by case basis. Like I said, mold is everywhere. It's in the ground. It's in the park. It's in cheese. It's on your fruit bowl. So look, to have a hygienist, it's normally on the larger scale claims where the mold is obviously very prevalent and throughout the property. But I tend to look at the job on a case by case and appoint a hygienist as it's required. You localise and contain the contaminated areas. If you have mold in one room, you don't necessarily need to have everybody in the house move out. You can actually close the room, contain the section where it has mold, whether it be plastic, and seal it, wet wipe it down and close the door, and deploy the appropriate remediation techniques. There's a lot of people out there in the industry that don't have any formal training. People go out and say, they stick mold on the side of their van and so that they can clean it. Be very cautious of those people. Unfortunately, the industry, there is a lot of people in the industry or propose to be in the industry that have no formal training. Just try to stay avoid. And at any stages you need or you're concerned, you can always ask the company or the technicians for their certifications to show that the person that actually is on site has been trained in that field and knows what to do in that situation. All our panel restorers are at Sedgwick are all vetted and make sure that they do carry the correct certification. And whenever they go to site, we make sure that it's the right man on the right job, not someone does fires out there doing mold, because it doesn't really work that well. And that's it with the mold and asbestos. Apologies if I went through pretty quick, but I just want to move on to Paul now. Paul will take this one and I'll control the slideshow. Hopefully I do that well, Paul. And we'll move on. Thanks for your time and thanks for listening.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Paul Anderson here in now sunny Brisbane, somewhat. Going to talk to you this morning about methamphetamine, which is a subject that gets press every now and then, but I just want to make you aware of how common it is in our society. It tends to get a little bit sheltered or tucked underneath a mat as being a too hard a subject to deal with, but it is prevalent. So what is meth? It's a highly addictive drug. It's got some common street names. You'll often hear it referred to as meth, ice, or P. They're the most common names, but it has about 50 or 60 different names on the street. It's usually smoked, but it can also be dissolved into a liquid, injected, or snorted. It's easy to manufacture and it can be made using just normal common household items that you find. Can you just switch that, please, Ryan? So the precursor drugs and chemicals that are used in methamphetamine, so it's easily made by combining the below chemicals, simply mixing, for example, into a 2-litre drink bottle. So what people will take is a 2-litre Coca-Cola bottle or one similar, and they'll do what we call a shake and bake method. It's the most common household way of making methamphetamine. I'm not here to teach you how to make it for sure, but want you to know that it can be simply made in a house. So the most common chemicals or drugs that are used in, thanks mate, used in the manufacture of methamphetamine are over the counter, for example, pseudoephedrine. So it's found in cold tablets. Ephedrine is also a natural medication stimulant, but it's extracted, also can be extracted from a plant that's found in nature. So in times of COVID, we've found that it's been very difficult for a lot of illicit drug manufacturers to source pseudoephedrine and ephedrine, but now they're turning to plants and using the extraction method to take ephedrine out of the plant and use that as a precursor for methamphetamine. So lithium, so they unroll the battery, take out the lithium plate that's inside in the battery. Red phosphorus found in matches and road flares, aluminium, that should be zinc, excuse me, zinc, lead, and iodine. So what those are, the aluminium, zinc, lead, and iodine, and the red phosphorus and the lithium mainly are what we call catalysts. So it's mixed in to create a chemical reaction and bond inside a 2-litre container. And then you add all these other lovely products like ammonium nitrate, ether, sodium hydroxide, and then they extract methamphetamine from the top. The way I want to describe this to you real quickly is similar. If you get a 2-litre Coke bottle and it's a hot day, and I'm sure every one of us have experienced this, you open it up at the supermarket or wherever you're buying it from, and it tends to explode. So that pressure that builds up inside of that bottle has to be released. And what they're doing here is they're shaking the bottle to create a chemical reaction inside the bottle. And when they release the top, which they need to do to release the pressure, sometimes they explode. So in your properties, you'll probably find areas, red chemical, nasty brown, white chemical spills on carpets and sometimes on the floor in the garage. So Ryan, please. Okay, so where can we find it? We can find it in most properties. Rented properties, which are landlord claims, strata, residential, Airbnb, as I said, it's so quick to make it. They can actually mix this up very, very quickly, a number of hours, as a matter of fact, and manufacture methamphetamine. So Airbnb, community housing, government housing. Ryan, thanks. So what are the signs? So it's often identified by somebody prior to coming to an insurer, for example. So it'll be a property manager or the owner of the property will notice something strange. If you look at that photograph up the top there, why is it discolored in the bathtub? Well, they are manufacturing methamphetamine. A lot of people overlook at it and say, oh, okay, they were just, grotty people living in the house, so it's poor housekeeping. But I'd like you to keep an open mind when it comes to methamphetamine and identifying it. Because a lot of the times it is actually not, it's not poor housekeeping. If you match it up with the other signs, then okay, you've got possible manufacturing here. So manufacturing is also known as cooking. You'll find things like altered smoke detectors, malicious damage, such as holes in the walls, busted doors, red staining to bath, as I mentioned, the carpets, as in this photograph on the right there. And then what they'll often do as well is paint the walls to hide the manufacturing signs. Use inside a property is more difficult to detect, especially if they're using needles or syringes, because if you don't find the needles or syringes, you might not know that anything's actually happened in there whatsoever. But quite often, you'll also come across pipes or smoking utensils. Okay, so the indicators. Again, the most common thing that you need to be looking for in properties, or your property manager, whoever's managing the property, needs to be looking for evidence of rough living. Again, most people who are smoking methamphetamine or using methamphetamine are not in their right mind. They will, it affects them greatly. And so there's evidence of rough living, rubbish and other items left around the premises. Again, the red stains on the walls, red stains on the carpet. They'll tend, if they're manufacturing, tend to cover or black out windows. They may not have, blacked out windows, but if you look around the frames of the windows, you might see tacks or nails where they've hung curtains or, black plastic over the windows. There might be a strong odor of acetone, ammonia, or other chemical smells. Quite often, one of the most common indicators or comments we hear is, well, the house smells like they've had a cat in there, the cat urine. In actual fact, it could be the ammonia, which is off-gassing. Sometimes pill packaging from the pseudoephedrine, stains on walls, attempts to clean, burns, powers, residues, and crystalline residue on benches. So normally in a garage, for example, you might see a big acid stain or a spill on the garage. Or a big red stain, may not necessarily be, from the radiator in the car. Keep it in mind. Quite often there's also corrosion to metal surfaces on cabinet hinges, towels, racks, and doorknobs. And again, red orange staining to drains, sinks, and toilets, and also in shower facilities. It seems to be the trend now. People are making them in the shower so they can flush them down. So what are the dangers? Obviously, meth's not good for your health. This young lady in this photograph is a classic example as to why you should not use methamphetamine. It's unlike any other drug contamination because cigarettes, for example, remains in the building, but you can actually clean it, whereas methamphetamine, because it's a residue and it's not broken down by using normal detergents, it can stay in there for years. And the only way to get to remove that is by mechanically removing, which is scrubbing it, or using a specific methamphetamine chemical treatment. So it doesn't disappear and it can remain there for years, as I said. Testing's also proved that simply painting over a contaminated plasterboard doesn't eliminate contamination, and it will eventually leach through the paint in due course. Testing. So why is the testing important? Okay, so at Sedgwick, what we do is we follow the Australian Government Clandestine Drug Laboratory Remediation Guidelines of 2011. It's not a regulated industry, folks. So we have to follow the highest authority, which is the Australian government at this stage. You should be doing rapid testing in a property if you suspect it's been used for smoking or manufacturing. A rapid test, we'll go through that, I think, in a second. If a positive, I'll just explain quickly to you what a rapid test is. It's just a very, very quick test, like you'll get, say, a pregnancy test, or it'll be like a roadside breath test. Can't be used to confirm the levels of use inside the property, but it can identify methamphetamine use inside the property. So if you get a positive result from that rapid test, then it's that stage you'd move to engaging a hygienist or an IEP. So what the IEP or hygienist will do is they'll collect samples and they'll send them off to a NAT accredited laboratory for analysis. So what's really important that you need to take away from this today is that when we're testing for manufacturing of methamphetamine in a property, the hygienist needs to take ghost wipe samples. So those ghost wipe samples are then tested for the heavy metals, which is used in the manufacturing process. As again, we mentioned earlier, red phosphorus, iodine, lithium, aluminium, and zinc. The presence of those chemicals, those heavy metals inside your property at elevated levels will clearly define that it's actually a drug laboratory. There's no other way. Just simply having pseudoephedrine may or may not confirm that. Depends on the level of contamination. So based on the level of contamination that the hygienist discovers, they'll also prepare a remediation action plan that's appropriate to that level of decontamination. A remediation company is required to carry out any decontamination as per the hygienist's recommendations. So what we don't want happening is we don't want Billy Bob off the street who goes, oh, I'm going to be a methamphetamine remediator, so I'll just create my own remediation action plan. You know, you need somebody who's suitably qualified to write that remediation action plan, someone who's suitably qualified to carry out the works according to that. At the end of it, what happens is we get a hygienist to do a clearance. The clearance is then provided through to any authority. So it's a short insurer, or you know that that property is fit for occupation. And I'm not really sure why this slide is in here, but this is our team. So Daniel McCulloch heads up our team. Amy King's our customer delivery manager. Natasha Greenhill looks after all of our suppliers on board. We've got Ryan, myself, and we've got a full support team behind us of case managers. Okay, thanks, guys. I know I went through that very, very quickly. Obviously, we're on a schedule of time. I'm happy to be contactable for any questions that you've got regarding methamphetamine. It is something that I feel very strongly about, and I will always take your call or your email. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much to Paul and Ryan for the presentation that they've just conducted. Some really good information there. We will send a copy of that presentation out or a link to the copy of the presentation out with the recording that we're sending out to you later today of the session. So you'll be able to get your hands on that and share that around. Now we're moving into the question section of the of the webinar. We've had lots of chat coming through, so I've just been trying to keep up with that. So thanks to everyone who are popping questions in there. If you can just remember to let me know which state you're sending questions from. If you're popping questions in the chat, that would be great. And we'll get through as many as we can. So we had a few that were submitted to us before the event, so we might just tackle those two first, if that's okay. So we've got Wayne from Victoria asking, I have a couple of lots that regularly flood via faulty roofs. There is a lot of pigeon mess and dirt that's flown in through the floor above into the lot boundary and settled around the lighting balustrades and plaster. Mould is growing on the plaster ceiling, behind the plaster wall and on the brickwork. These areas haven't been flooded for over a year. I'm wondering about the health impacts. Does the ceiling need to be replaced?
Oh, thanks, Nikki. I'll answer that one. Obviously, for mould to be visually grown on the plaster ceiling, as I said before, the water ingress issue will need to be addressed. Obviously, mould, as I said, requires moisture, oxygen, and a food source in order to grow. Generally, if you remove one or the other three, the mould will stop growing. With regards to the mould growing behind the plaster, I'm assuming they're referring to the mould growing on the back of the plaster, the gyprock. If that is the case, the best form of mould remediation is the removal of the mould damaged plaster if it has been structurally compromised. Now, don't get it mixed, because sometimes surface mould on plaster can be just wiped down and decontaminated. It all depends on whether the mould is growing through the plaster or it's just on the surface. If mould is growing on the brickwork, that can simply be decontaminated. The bricks are not a natural food source. And if there's any visual mould on the bricks, it's likely growing on the dirt on the bricks, not the bricks themselves, similar to mould on glass. Obviously, as we know, mould is everywhere in our environment and everyone reacts differently to it. In regards to the health conditions when exposed to different levels of mould and different every person, unfortunately, the only person that can determine what health impacts are a doctor. And yeah, it's obviously independent of the individual exposed to mould. More than happy to look at it further if there's some photos of the area to give a bit more advice. I'm just going off on what the information has been provided. I hope. Oh, and get rid of the pigeons.
Yeah, pigeons are no good, are they? Okay, that's great. Thank you. And then we've got a question from Queensland this time, from Rosemary. I'm looking for some guidance regarding a central air conditioner which produces, controls and distributes untreated air using ducts. The air conditioner is causing black mould to all units. Our apartment is within a hotel holiday let structure. We believe the air is not treated with a heat wheel to remove contaminants before it's fed into the hotel rooms and apartments. The ceilings directly in front of the air vents are covered in black mould. Every room has a dehumidifier installed. It attempts to manage the issue, but the mould returns 2 weeks later all year round. Our body corporate states that mould is the responsibility of the lot owner of each apartment. I'm a member of the body corporate. At a recent body corporate meeting, I raised this issue but was overruled. The body corporate is adamant they will not look to solve the overall problem. Who's responsible for the air conditioner and the black mould?
All right, that's got a lot of answers, this one. Look, firstly, central AC units and home split systems are renowned for mould growth at the best of times. Just like AC units in cars. It's because obviously the AC units produce moisture during the summer and winter months when they're using hot or cold settings. The air that generally passes through the ducts is passed through numerous filters before the processed air actually enters the area, in your case, the units. The level of contamination, if any, is generally in conjunction with the regular maintenance and regular servicing of the AC main units and ducts. What I'm saying is if the AC unit is frequently serviced based on its operation run times, then the filters within the unit would be replaced at regular intervals. If these filters are HEPA filters, then they will filter out over 99% of all particles and in turn minimize and reduce any exposure concerns. Now, with the term using black mold, obviously there's two ways black mold's used. It's either referring to something that everyone refers to as toxic black mold, which is Stachybotrys, or they may be referring to the pigmentation and staining left behind from mold that was once growing. Just because there's black stuff on the wall doesn't necessarily mean that it's a live mold or it's growing. It may be just the pigmentation left behind. I can talk to more in detail, obviously, in regards to which one that you're referring to. With regards to the heat wheels that you mentioned, these are usually in reference to desk and dehumidifiers and sometimes referred to silica wheels. This is where the main purpose is to absorb moisture. As the wheel turns slowly, it's heated up to assist in evaporation and the dry air is passed out. Some industrial units used in shopping centres have these functions and features built in. However, it's not normally utilised in high traffic public areas where ventilation air changes is an issue and not a residential or smaller facilities. But unfortunately, the majority of issues surrounding mould in rooms and units can be in relation to ventilation limitations. That is high moisture in the room or environment. This will in turn assist the mould in growth. Opening windows and flushing out the internal air on dry days does do wonders for the internal area of the home, reduces the mould growth in units and will assist more than actually running a dehumidifier 24/7. That and cleaning of the surface with mould chemical will most likely solve your problem. Remember, mould needs moisture, oxygen, and a natural food source. Acrylic paint is not a natural product. Therefore, the mould must be growing on something else on the ceiling unless the ceiling is unpainted. Sorry, but in regards to who's responsible for fixing what, that is not my department. I won't make a comment on that one. I can just help in sort of rectifying the situation.
Yeah, we might just at that point clarify that Ryan and Paul are here to help us with the issue itself that they're talking about, not so much who's responsible and what happens from the body corporate or owners corporation side, but we can certainly get somebody to look at those that part of the question for you, and we'll get back in touch with everyone who's asked a question referring to who's responsible. So thank you. We do appreciate the information that you're providing to us. Now, you were mentioning to Ryan about the natural food source. We did have a question come through, just some clarification about what the food source actually is. Can you give us a little bit more information about that?
Well, basically, a natural food source, it has to be an organic matter, like paper, wood. It needs to grow on something that's organic, and that's why sometimes when you see mold on windows, it's really not growing on the windows. It's growing on the dirt that's on the windows. So that's what I mean. Now, that is the organic matter. Without that, or without moisture or oxygen, the mold won't grow. So as if you remove the moisture, the mold will stop. If you remove the oxygen, obviously, then that will move as well.
Okay, excellent. And we've had quite a bit of conversation and chat going on, as I mentioned, with questions coming through. Now, this is actually a question that I had, so I'll ask this one. It's just to do with asbestos. You mentioned an asbestos risk category for older buildings. What is that? And if an older building's not aware whether they have asbestos in the building or not, should that building have an asbestos report carried out?
Yeah, look, the majority of us see it's normally about 1985, give or take. Prior to that, asbestos was used. After that, it started to phase out, and they stopped using asbestos in the products. There is some older properties where they had renovations. Sometimes it is removed, other times it's not. If a property has asbestos been identified, there's normally an asbestos register at the property, whether it be a building. So if you've got older style buildings and strata that actually have asbestos and previously been identified, there would be an asbestos register on site for them to refer to, which will clearly identify where in the building the asbestos is located. So if there's or any work that needs to be done, they can refer to that. If not, if there's any suspect situation where you believe asbestos may be present, the best thing is to call in a hygienist to have it tested at a lab to confirm it is or isn't. And that'll also help provide if it needs to be removed or rectified.
Thank you. Okay, another question about mould. Can you provide some tips to our viewers who have joined us from areas affected by the recent high rainfall? What should they be doing right now to prevent mould as much as possible? And you mentioned ventilation, so opening windows and doors. If there's high humidity still outside, what can they be doing inside the unit to prevent mould from forming?
Look, it's basically dry. If you've got an air conditioner inside the place split system, if you set it to a dry setting, that will assist. Now, the hardest thing is if there's high humidity outside and you don't have an air conditioner, there's not much you can do because, as we all know, you can't remediate Mother Nature. When it rains, the mold spores are less likely to be around. But if you've got high humidity and it's wet outside, it's just a matter of when the day is perfect, the environment, open it up. There's not much you can do. If there is high humidity outside and it's wet inside, you're just gonna have to wait for the nearest. But you can install fans. However, if you do install fans to speed up the rate of evaporation or dehumidifiers, make sure that you can keep the wet air or anything inside flushed out. It's just every day is going to be different. Some days are better than others. That's why with the remediation and the drying, when we do structural drying, there is a closed drying technique and an open environment technique, but that's all depending on what's outside. If you get a situation where you got 2 weeks worth of rain, there's absolutely nothing you can do. We're just gonna have to wait it out, keep it dry, keep a dry setting on the air conditioner, and just, yeah, that's the best you can do. And remove its source, if not.
Okay. Okay, this one was from New South Wales, from Brenda. She said, I have a dehumidifier and I use it. And what water level setting am I supposed to be trying to get down to?
Water level, are there? Look, basically, the main thing, mold grows in a perfect environment. Now, the main thing is you need to reduce the relative humidity. Now, if you can get it down to around about 45 to 50% relative humidity, that's the moisture content in the air. A lot of people don't have the devices that actually can monitor the relative humidity. Restorers normally carry it. I carry it along with thermal imaging cameras. But if you can get it down to about 45 to 50, that's good. Anything above probably 65% is able to, like, the environment is able to grow mold. So the drier you can keep it, the better. Don't go too dry, because if you go below 45% relative humidity, you start to get an itchy throat and it will dry out the air probably a little bit too much. So aim for about 45 to 50 and you shouldn't have a problem.
Thanks, Brian. I'm just going through the questions. A lot of them are around who is responsible for removing the mold. So as I said, we'll just hold those ones over. Meredith had asked, when you were talking about if you've got people coming out to the building to have a look at things like mold and asbestos, make sure that they've got the right certification. And she was asking, what certifications exactly should we be looking for to choose an expert?
Well, obviously, a lot of the restorers are IICRC certification, is the Institute of Inspection of Cleaning and Restoration. I have my license, I show, but you can ask them for their actual certification license. Normally, when you are certified, you're given a license to carry, or a card to carry around you, which will actually state what you've been trained in. You can ask at any time to see that. There is other training companies out there like the ITI. It's not really governed by an American standard. It's done by another company, but any form of training with the IICRC or ITI is preferably the IICRC. But if they can't produce any documentation to say they've had any training, then or they're certified in anything, then err on the side of caution. And if your gut tells you something doesn't seem right, then yeah, just ask for another person. You can get onto the IICRC website. Sometimes they have a list of certified technicians in states that you can look up. But at the same time, if a company is registered or certified as IICRC and are trained, make sure the technician that's coming to site is the one that holds the certification. There's no good having the boss that sits back in the office have all the training, but his technicians that go out to site have no idea, aren't certified. So try to avoid that. And don't be scared to ask.
Definitely. Martin had asked from New South Wales, and this is to do with the right to investigate, I guess, like how much evidence do you need to investigate whether meth use or manufacture is occurring. He's saying one of our apartments has covered windows. Do we have the right to enter the unit or obligation to investigate if that's happening, or how much evidence do you actually need to move forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, you've got to respect the right to privacy. They're obviously renting or using that apartment for their own use. We need to be very cautious around that. For the record, also, I'm an ex-police officer out of the United States. So Yes, the best time to test it, unfortunately, is during the lapse of the lease, when the lease ends and a new tenant comes in. If you suspect that that something's happening in the property, I mean, just directly ask what's happening with why do you have the windows covered. I would think that also there may be something that you need to do if you have a tenant in a property that is moving in. Okay, we're testing. I just want to let you know in writing, we're testing this property for methamphetamine presence. It'll be tested at the end of the tenancy. Do you agree to those terms? I wouldn't be looking at anything else. Otherwise, it could open a lawsuit.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. And I guess there would be, it wouldn't just be the windows covered. You would have to have some sort of, so something else happening that would indicate to you that there's something going on in the unit. I mean, if it's just the windows covered, they could be night workers and they're just shutting out the sunlight so they can get a good night's sleep.
100%. So that combined with other indicators, and those indicators will be there. You'll see them. If you're walking into a property and you see holes in the wall, the first thing you're going to say is, sorry, how did that get there? What are these stains on the carpets? Why are these smoke detectors been removed or altered?
Definitely. Okay, thank you. We had a question from Nicola from ACT. I'm sorry, I haven't read through this one yet, so I hope that it's applicable. I've just had an insurer decline a loss of rent claim after a hygienist attended and found elevated samples of meth. Remediation work reported was extremely extensive. However, insurer said that the levels weren't high enough to deem the unit uninhabitable and said the tenant was just a user.
Yeah, really good question. Comes up all the time. One of my biggest problems that I have is trying to educate users in what is considered a laboratory, what's not considered a laboratory. This is an unregulated industry, sadly. The Australian standard says that in order for a property to be unsafe for habitation, you need to have a level of 0.5 micrograms per 100 centimetres squared. So in other words, a 10 by 10 template's put onto a wall and it's tested for methamphetamine. That's taken to a laboratory, a NAT accredited laboratory, and it's tested. Now, that gives an overall view. So if that's above 0.5, then the Australian government says that that needs to be remediated. At that stage, it's not fit for habitation. So until remediation is done and a clearance certificate's provided by the hygienist, then yes, they would need to. Now, the question was, I believe that a hygienist has identified methamphetamine, and what were the levels of methamphetamine? Were they above the 0.5?
I'm so sorry, Paul. I've been jumping in and out of the question. So was that? I'm trying to keep up with what's going on in the chat. So that was the question for the.
Yes, I'll be going back. I'll be going back and saying, okay, is it above the 0.5 micrograms per 100 centimetres squared? And that'll be identified in the hygienist report. Just make sure it's a hygienist that the person asking the questions, talking about, because people often refer to themselves as hygienists, and they're not suitably qualified according to the Australian standard. So okay, I just see it right now from Nicola.
From Nicola, it is.
Nicola. Thanks, Nicola. Okay, 3 of the levels. So those 3 areas inside the property will need to be remediated. I highly recommend that if there's trace levels of methamphetamine in the other areas, to clean those as well. Just as a precaution, and I'll tell you why, because the samples that are taken from an area inside that room, the area, because it's not consistent in the way it spreads throughout the room, that area could have higher levels of methamphetamine in that haven't been detected by the attending hygienist. So if it's, say, a 0.3 on a wall that's near the door, the one near the bed, or bedside table could be much higher. So I'd recommend that if it is showing trace levels, definitely get them all remediated.
Okay, and just on meth again, we've had another question come in from Kiri asking what are the consequences to new tenants or new residents if meth is found in a property?
Okay, so yes, there are health issues. Methamphetamine is hand to mouth. So if you have young children in the house and they touch the walls, you know, kids stick their fingers in their mouths every 5 seconds. So the issue with that is, yes, they can be ingesting methamphetamine. So I would truly be looking at having a property. When I moved to Brisbane here 3 years ago, I hadn't rented, but believe me, I tested the house when I moved into the house. Now it was don't care what neighborhood it's in. You could have the most expensive house. You know, I would be checking for methamphetamine prior to moving into a property.
Okay, so that we're in a strata property, would that include common areas as well?
More unlikely, except if there's a common bathroom or toilet, that would be a high risk area for sure. I don't know. Sorry, I don't know how that affects strata properties, but if there is one or an area that like a breakout room, there may be that may need to be tested.
Okay, thank you. Joanne has asked us if there is an asbestos register on site, a management plan, and it states to leave in place unless disturbed, and then an issue arises from the asbestos in place, what is the liability or ramifications to the owners corporation insurance-wise?
I can't. That's a question I can't answer. It's obviously policy related. Yeah, there's a lot more involved with it. With respect to the actual asbestos, it's a rule of thumb is if it's been compromised in any way, shape or form, action needs to be taken to rectify it, either to make safe or have it removed. In regards to the other, I don't know that side of the question. Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. We had one from Janine from Queensland to do with asbestos as well. That one is, our building is about 40 years old. My apartment door in our high rise is still asbestos. Is this safe or should it be removed? Most of the other doors in the building have been changed.
Look, ideally, what's the interesting to know what the reason the other ones have been replaced, but that one hasn't. That's the first thing I'd look into. Second of all, look, asbestos, unfortunately, is still in a lot of places, and it can remain there for a very long time if left undisturbed. Look, ideally, if there is a reason why the other doors have been replaced and yours is still asbestos, I'd be looking at asking why and possibly getting it replaced, considering it is a main door. Even though there's no major risk at this point, like I said, unless it's compromised to have it replaced, if everyone else has done, I don't see why they shouldn't get their one. They should get their one replaced as well. Probably the best form actually is to remove it if it's in the main area.
And we've had a question from Brisbane again, from Mystery. What is the most cost-effective treatment that can be applied to mould affected areas?
As in regards to I'm assuming in regards to the cleaning or maintaining the area? If you've got mould in.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Just probably they've got mould in the area and they're just wondering what the most cost-effective treatment would be to remove it.
Oh, basically, like you can clean mould down with warm soapy water. There is the theory that you can use an 80-20 vinegar water mix. Look, that's still open for subjects. Some people don't like the smell of vinegar unless you've got some chips to go with it. But yeah, look, you can use mold killers and all that type of stuff. But look, the idea is to remove the mold. That's the first point of call. Using a mold remover or mold killer or mold bleach or whatever, all that does is just, it's like a oxidization. It just will remove the color of the mold. It may still be there. So warm soapy water, wet wiping it. Try to avoid spraying with a trigger spray. You don't want to get, if there is mold spores, if you spray it with a trigger or anything like that, what it can do is cause the mold spores to aerolize and go around, and that's when you can breathe them in. But a damp, hot bucket of soapy water, and you can just wet wipe it down and just keep the area dry. Everybody's bathroom is renowned to get mold at one point, but look, it's each to everyone. But look, there's nothing major. There's no special treatment to it. You can just clean it down with warm soapy water.
Okay, we've had one from Natalie from New South Wales. In our strata, we had an asbestos incident with our fire doors. They were tested as positive for asbestos, but I found enforcement a problem. SafeWork New South Wales were only interested while the tradesperson was there and not in remediation, as was no longer a workplace. EPA only interested in public property areas, and the council was only interested in council areas. How is it possible to enforce remediation?
If you engage a hygienist, then a hygienist will obviously look at all the legislation, and what they normally do is we get the hygienist out because they will formulate a remediation action plan and a safe removal of asbestos, because they'll identify the areas. Once they have turned around and provided identification and a scope of work to have the asbestos removed, they also need to notify SafeWork New South Wales. Then there's obviously, they will put recommendations whether air monitoring is required. And at the end of all the remediation works, it needs to be signed off by that hygienist again to confirm that it is safe and asbestos has been removed and the place is safe to reoccupy. So hygienist does help a lot because they will notify SafeWork New South Wales of what works are carrying out, and they need to follow it up.
Okay, and just probably one more. This one was from Meredith from, I think, New South Wales. We had a mould expert visit our apartment 2 years ago, and he told us not to use dehumidifiers or damp rid style containers and to use low bar heaters and fans and ventilators instead. However, the mould right now is, of course, a far bigger problem given the weather. Why would he have told us this, and was it good advice?
Look, like I said, to get rid of the mold, I'm not a big fan. I wouldn't be using anything that incorporates air movement in an area where mold. Try to avoid as much as possible. Like I said, you referred to the damp wiping off, getting it dry, keeping it dry with a dehumidifier. A heat lamp is only something that will mainly used in lower climates, like down in Tasmania where it gets really cold, where a lot of the dehumidifiers, whether there's conventional dehumidifiers, desiccant dehumidifiers, and desiccant and LGR, low grain refrigerant. Now, if you use the conventional ones, what happens as the temperature gets too cold, the dehumidifier doesn't work and shuts down and goes into defrost mode. Then you introduce heat into the environment to actually increase it, because obviously the warmer the air, the more that the can absorb the moisture. But I would be, damp rids are a temporary measure unless you plan on changing. All they're doing is just going to absorb the moisture in the air. Dehumidifier is probably the best option. I don't know what they mean, why they would say don't use a dehumidifier, because a dehumidifier's purpose is to reduce moisture in the air and pump out dry air, not necessarily hot air, but dry air. But yeah, it's just, we need to get rid of, find out where it's coming in for, why the mold is growing, and just, warm soapy water, keep it clean, keep the air in the room dry. And like I said, if you can get it down to about 45, 50% relative humidity, you shouldn't have an issue of mold growing at all.
Thank you so much for all of the information. I think we've peppered both of you with lots of questions during the session. So it's been great to get those responses back. Just before we finish up, is there anything else you'd like to add to the session at this point after the questions, Ryan or Paul, about what we've discussed today? Just a last tip or point? Well,
what I do is every job is different, and that's the joys of the industry. Like, you can write a book, read a book, but everything needs to be applied to that given environment. There's a lot of outline factors. I'm happy to share my contact, mobile number, email, and if any time someone needs a question, by all means, shoot me an email. More than happy to assist, and with some photos. Photos do wonders for me. If I can see what I'm looking at, I have good understanding on how to do it. But always here, always available to help anyone's got any problem, because there is people out there that probably will feed the wrong information and actually scare you. Refer to Dr. Google, as we all say. So it's just, at the end of the day, we just need to look at what's at hand and how we're going to rectify it, and the best course of action.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Paul, have you got anything you'd like to add at this point?
Yeah, just the same thing. Thanks so much for the time today, guys. Really appreciate it. There's a lot that I can talk to about methamphetamine, and I invite you to please get in touch with me via email or mobile. Happy to help around this subject and give you as much information, and it's honest information. There are a lot of people out there who are employing scare tactics that are not qualified suitably according to the Australian government. We want to try and eliminate that so that you've got the right advice. So please reach out, get in touch with us. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we will definitely be sharing both Ryan and Paul's contact details at the bottom of both the video and also the page that we will be embedding this on the LookUpStrata website. So thank you so much for your offer to assist people in the future. Of course, it's always LookUpStrata's aim to get the right information out there to people and to help people that are out there, especially at the moment with all of the events that are happening up and down the East Coast. We're thinking of everyone that's affected by that. And thanks so much for all of the comments that people have got coming in. Everyone's saying it was a really great presentation. Thanks so much for your time and for the information that you've provided. So yeah, I'd just like to just again thank you for your time that you've spent with us and the information that you've shared with us today. Thanks to everyone that's jumped into the session, and hopefully you've gotten some really great value out of that. If you did submit a question and we either didn't have a chance to get to it or we haven't covered it in full because there might have been a part to it to do with the owners corporation or body corporate's responsibilities, we will do our best to get that information back to you. And you can jump onto our website and just go to our Ask a Strata question page and submit a question there if you've got something else that you'd like to know, or get in touch with Ryan or Paul directly and they'll certainly be able to help. All right, thank you so much again for your time today, and keep an eye out for other sessions that we've got coming up in the future, and we hope to see you then. So thanks again, Ryan and Paul.